All right, guys, we want to welcome back to the Everything College World podcast. Today, me and Nick here. We'll be doing our preview and prediction for the Week 2 contest between Texas and Alabama. Game day will be in town at Bryant-Denny in Tuscaloosa, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Alabama's 7-point favorites, 56.5 is the total. Looking at this Texas offense, yesterday, Nick, they settled for a handful of field goals in the first half against Rice. But overall, in the second half, they were able to get in gear and they scored a handful of touchdowns. They were certainly able to get this passing attack going. Quinn Ewers, 260, 3 touchdowns, completed 19 of 30 passes. Last year, this was a quarterback that certainly struggled in big games. The Oklahoma State film, I just still have not gotten out of my head of how bad it was. This is a player, though, in his one of his first career starts against Alabama last year, was putting on a show in that first quarter and a half or so before he got injured. He was really able to attack this defense downfield, plenty of nice balls, and a lot of people were very happy with what they saw with Ewers. Was not really the same player after his injury, though. Looked very good against Oklahoma, but towards the back half of the season, this passing attack was just not very good. But this is a phenomenal receiving core. Isaiah Neyor, a guy has plenty of speed. They're looking to maybe get involved in this game. Only had a couple of snaps against Rice. A.D. Mitchell from Georgia. Xavier Worthy, though, a player has elite speed. He can really attack you vertically. Jordan Whittington, more of a possession pass catcher. They can attack you underneath. And then Jonte Cook, a true freshman, they might also want to get on field here. They're going to unload the big guns in this game. They're going to get everybody involved in this receiving core to try to expose this Alabama secondary. What's your assessment of what you saw against Rice, and how do you think they're going to perform here in Tuscaloosa?
I think Ewers played pretty well against Rice. I think he looked good in the pocket, looked comfortable. 260 through the air, 3 touchdowns is a pretty solid number. Xavier Worthy led the way in terms of receptions. He had 7 catches for 90 yards. I think a lot of the offense this year is going to run through Worthy. He's a very talented wide receiver, obviously getting a lot of looks for future in the NFL draft due to that untapped potential. Worthy was involved early on. Looked good, 12.9 yards per catch was pretty solid. Jordan Whittington as well is a pretty solid player. He had 47 yards receiving yesterday, 4 receptions for him. So they did spread it out early. They got a couple different guys involved. Brooks was involved out of the backfield. He had a nice amount of carries. He had 12 carries as well. Some nice catches for him. He had 2 grabs and he has a touchdown as well. So I think they're going to try and find good balance here. I think they have nice balance out of the backfield as well, throwing the ball. I think Ewers looks confident, right? Obviously another season working with the coaching staff, working through spring practice is always good for a young quarterback. Ewers looked great against Alabama last year, the starting game before his injury. He's going to look to have that sort of same momentum and look comfortable in the pocket.
In this Alabama defensive front, I've been critical of it in the past, but let's not get it twisted. This is still a great run defense from last year. Bijan Robinson, 57 yards on 21 carries. They really bottled him up, and they don't have that anymore. They still have a nice backfield, but none of these guys are Bijan Robinson. Jaden Blue, C.J. Baxter was a guy that got involved. This is certainly Jonathan Brooks as well, Keelan Robinson. They're very deep at the running back position, but it's going to be hard to run the ball here. The interior offensive line for Texas was a big struggle last year. Jake Majors, he's great at center, nice communicator for them. Hayden Conner, though, was a struggle. DJ Campbell, he was really good in his few appearances last year, and he got the start against Rice and looked very good as well. So they're hoping that true sophomore, who's a high-end recruit, can provide more for them. Kelvin Banks is obviously a bookend at left tackle, and Christian Jones, he had his fair share of struggles at right tackle, but I think they're confident in being able to contain this Alabama pass rush led by Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner. But I'm really focusing on this interior, Nick, because if you want to win in college football, especially against teams like Alabama, you got to be strong there. The guard positions last year were an issue for me, so that's got to be a difference right here on this interior if they want to win this game. Really hard to expect them to be much better than they were last year against the Crimson Tide, because, again, they had Bijan Robinson, and springing big plays in the ground game just was not evident. It's going to be much harder this time around.
Certainly going to be difficult considering the lack of talent they have at running back compared to a guy like Bijan Robinson, who was a top 10 draft pick in the NFL draft for a reason. I think Jonathan Brooks, like I said, is a talented running back who has nice untapped potential. We saw him in certain bursts yesterday. He looked good during his limited touches, 12 attempts, 52 yards on the ground, 4.3 yards per carry, and he had 2 catches as well. So there are some nice potential there. The interior, I was a little concerned with the interior, and I think guy like DJ Campbell really did worry me at times. Christian Jones at right tackle worried me as well. This Alabama pass rush looked good against Middle Tennessee. I know it's not saying much, it's Middle Tennessee, but they did look decent against Middle Tennessee. So it is going to be a tough matchup here for this Texas offensive line. They're going to have to hold their own in the trenches to give their quarterback some time to make some plays.
Yeah, and you want to avoid a slow start here. Last year, they got out to a fiery start, maybe not exactly on the scoreboard, but in terms of big plays and really having this defense on their heels, I thought they did a good job of doing that. I think they really need to attack a young, iffy safety group. We'll talk about them in depth here in a minute. But true freshman Caleb Downs, he's a starter back there for them. This is going to be a big test for him and the rest of those guys. I really want to see them attack those guys vertically. They have the speed and the weapons to do so. I think that's going to be their best chance to really be able to run the ball, is to be able to throw downfield, and then you'll be able to maybe spark some 4 or 5 yard plays on the ground. It'll lead to a great balance for this offense of Texas. Final thoughts on the expectations here, especially this passing attack that I think they're going to have to throw about 40, 50 times to win this game.
I think this is a very good unit. They're certainly going to have to go through the air if they want to beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. That's the only way I really think you can do is you have to put up a ton of points early on and attack them through the air and try to hit those weaknesses in the secondary unit that can certainly be there considering it's a very youthful unit. I think Quinn Ewers is ready to go. I think he's going to be in a good spot here and ready to try and bounce back after getting hurt last year, missing what was a very iconic game at Texas. This is going to be a tough matchup, I think, for this offensive line. They'll struggle, but overall, I think this offense has a lot of potential. They look good against Rice.
Looking at the Alabama offense, last year in this game, we expected them to come out on fire and just put it on Texas, and they were awful. 10 points in the first quarter. One touchdown they had was a long run sprung by Jace McClellan. 10 points in the fourth quarter, including a game-winning field goal. They were just awful, Nick, in quarters 2, 3, and even in the fourth one, I don't know how many 3-and-outs they had in a row. It was just embarrassing. They could not run the ball at all. Other than that one long run, they were not good at all on the ground. They only had 24 carries total because they just really gave up, and they weren't on the field that much. Bryce Young heroics really bailed them out that day. They couldn't even get Jahmyr Gibbs free. It was just a pretty poor effort all around. And things are going to be much different this time around, though. Jalen Milroe got the start. This is a guy who can really affect you with his legs, and that's what he was known for last year, was being able to, establish, long plays with his legs. He had 48 yards and 2 touchdowns yesterday against Middle Tennessee. He also had 3 touchdowns, 194 through the air, really showcasing his arm. That's going to be the biggest key here for Milroe, though. Obviously wanted to see how he would improve on his fundamentals, his decision-making, and number one, protecting the football. What was your assessment of Milroe yesterday after he got the start, after a long-awaited quarterback decision?
I was very pleased with him yesterday. The footwork still worries me a little bit. The footwork I saw yesterday was not fantastic, but overall he looked more confident in the pocket. He completed a lot of plays downfield. He hit Burton downfield at one point, also hit a couple other receivers down the field. Had a nice pass to Kobe Prentice, a nice throw to Isaiah Bond as well. So Jalen Milroe looked confident. 13 of 18, 72% completion percentage last night, 194 yards. And the 3 touchdowns through the air, plus the 2 on the ground. We know we're going to get with the running, right? The running aspect of Jalen Milroe. He's going to bruise people, he's run people over. Didn't see a whole lot of attempts out of him. You only really had 7 attempts for 48 yards, and one of those was that busted play where the ball kind of fumbled and rolled to him off the snap, and he picked it up and scored from about 20 yards out, which is something that you get with him as a unique guy who can make plays. If the play falls apart, he can really build it up and really find his own way to create something unique and put up some points for this team. I think the wide receiving core looked good, and I think they're looking confident. Milroe is looking confident back there. He's got a cannon of an arm, and I want to see him use it against this Texas defense.
The Alabama running attack has certainly not been the greatest over the past couple of years. Certainly isn't the same compared to the early portion of Nick Saban's tenure, but it's just still a good rushing attack. But last year's game, they certainly want to avoid a repeat. Jace McClellan, Roydale Williams, Justice Hayes. They got a handful of guys they certainly want to get on the field here. We'll see who really takes the lead at running back, kind of a by-committee approach at this point. But I think they're really going to want to ride behind this left side. Caden Proctor got the start at left tackle, 6'7", 354. Second career start coming against a really good Texas defensive front. It's going to be interesting to see how he does. But Tyler Booker next to him at guard, he's a phenomenal run blocker. J.C. Latham at the other side at right tackle. Very interesting that they went with Proctor on the left side, Nick. I want you to kind of add your analysis on that. And at the same time, this offensive line has intense size, and they're all like 6'5", 330 plus or something like that. They have elite size that not many teams in the country have. They need to be better at running the ball. They need to be much more efficient. Last year, Jahmyr Gibbs just seemed to bail them out at times. They don't have that privilege this season. If they can't run the ball behind these big boys up front, it's going to be hard to accomplish much this season for the Crimson Tide.
I thought Chase McClellan looked good during his touches last night. I certainly need to see more out of him. He's supposed to be that kind of step-up number one back. He had 39 yards on the ground, 1 score on 10 attempts, so 3.9 yards per carry, which is a number that is far too low for a guy like McClellan. I really want to see him boost those numbers up. I was very intrigued to see Caden Proctor out there at left tackle. I didn't know what they were going to do. It's kind of rare for Nick Saban to throw a true freshman out there. Certainly throw a guy at left tackle, such a valuable position when you have Elijah Christians, who was on the bench, who has some experience. He could even play Terrence Ferguson out there as well. Proctor went out there. He looked good, though. He's a big guy. We flipped him late in the cycle for a reason, right? He flipped and came to Alabama for a reason. Very talented left tackle. Him and Booker looked very good. It's a very young left side, right? Booker's only a sophomore as well. Very young left side, but they held their own against Middle Tennessee, which has a pretty solid defense. I think it's a very underrated defense. Obviously, Texas defense is a lot different than that, but Middle Tennessee's defense is no slouch. It's no joke of a unit. Overall, I was very impressed with the offensive line. The size on them this year is fantastic. These guys are huge. And they looked good in the trenches last night, which is really something that I wanted to see out of this team. They got to find a way to get these running holes a little bit more open. I want to see Justice Hayes be involved a little bit, the true freshman. He got very limited touches last night. Roydale Williams is kind of that number 2 back with his 7 touches. Hayes only had 4 touches. But overall, I think this running back room, it's going to be a by-committee approach for now. It just, can they find the way to get those extra yards out of those guys early on in this game?
In Alabama, their receiving core is probably just as good as Texas. They certainly don't have the high-end talent like an Xavier Worthy, but they're incredibly deep with a lot of guys who were highly recruited, very similar skill sets. Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton were the really only guys that got touches last night. I mean, we didn't have too many, guys get involved. This is still incredibly deep. Kendrick Law, Ja'Cory Brooks, C.J. Dupree came over from Maryland. So this is a very deep receiving core here. I think they're going to be utilized in a variety of different ways. I think you're going to see a lot of screens, a lot of work underneath, because all these guys are elite athletes who can really make you miss in the open field. Kobe Pertise, he had about 3 receptions as well. So we'll see what happens and who will stand out in this receiving core. But I don't think anyone's expecting someone to be a true number one. I think this is also going to be a by committee approach, and whoever gets touches gets touches. Whoever earns the snaps earns them on a week-to-week basis. What's your assessment of this Alabama receiving core, and how many more receptions do you think we'll see? Because we only saw 17 of them last night.
Certainly hope to bump that number up to closer to 30. I think, it is going to be a by committee approach. I really liked what I saw out of Isaiah Bond. He looked like he was ready to step up and be involved and potentially take over that number one role. Jermaine Burton, he really kind of came on towards the end of last season. Burton was very good at Georgia and was a very exciting transfer, but his first half of the season last year for Alabama was just poor. Really didn't seem to show up at all, and then obviously had the off the field issues at Tennessee. The last couple of games, especially the bowl game against Kansas State, he looked really good. Burton seemed to come into his own. He had that touchdown last night. Seems to be improving fully. He could potentially be that number one guy as well. Kobe Prentice looked really good. C.J. Dupree was a very nice ad out of the portal, very underrated ad for Maryland. A big physical tight end, good on the blocks. He looked comfortable last night. I think he only had 1 catch, but overall, he was more of a player that disrupted things, kind of one of those players that you don't notice unless you're looking for it. He looked really good at tight end. I think this is going to be a split sort of receiving room, but I think Isaiah Bond, Burton, and Prentice will have nice balance. I think all 3 of these guys are very talented, and we could see them all get attacked very early on.
Looking at the defensive side of the ball for Texas, this was a run defense last year. There was no fluke. The 161 they allowed against Alabama, that was the most they gave up all year long. This is a very sound unit up front all season long. T'Vondre Sweat, a big player in the middle, he comes back for them. They're going to be looking for players to step up in this game, though. Byron Murphy maybe is one on the interior they can look to. Barron Sorrell, he was their best player last year off the edge. Alfred Collins as well on the interior. I think that's where he's shifted to now. This is certainly a unit that's got plenty of experience. That certainly has not stepped up at times. Ethan Burke was a good player during his freshman season periodically. Barron Sorrell, though, this is a guy they're going to look to match up with that true freshman Caden Proctor, because he was productive in getting to the backfield last year. How do you think this defensive line will do in this game? Because there's one big notion that needs to be accepted, and that's Moro Ojomo and Keandre Coburn, 2 elite run stoppers from a season ago. They're no longer here for Texas. Sweat's still there in the middle. He's a big 300-plus pounder. But I think that's certainly something they're not prepared to deal with, is the loss of those 2 men up front.
Certainly is a difficult loss for them. But they have some nice pieces that they brought in. Ethan Burke had 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks against Rice. So he looked pretty good in his appearance. He had 4 total tackles as well, coming off the edge in that buck position. Very talented player. Burke's a young guy who's going to be involved early on. Barron Sorrell as well. He's a very solid piece in the middle. He needs to get after the quarterback early. He needs to make the quarterback's uncomfortable at Alabama. He only had 2 tackles against Rice, so he needs to kind of find his groove. I need to get into that earlier. T'Vondre Sweat is a huge piece in the middle. He's going to be a nice big run clogging guy to have there in the middle. I think it's very helpful to have a guy like that who's got experience as a huge player. He had 5 total tackles and a tackle and a half for loss. So he's got some involvement early on. I think this front line is pretty good here, right? They're really good against the run last year, like you said. They weren't a fluky unit. They were very consistent against the run. When you have backs that are inexperienced and sort of uncomfortable position, it could be definitely a recipe to give Texas the advantage there.
I do want to focus in on Caden Proctor again, because obviously he's a 5-star true freshman, but this is still hard. This is big boy football you're going to step into here. Barron Sorrell had 5.5 sacks. Jalen Ford, though, he's their best player at linebacker. He had 10 TFL last year. They can really attack him mainly through the interior, but I think they're certainly going to throw him out there on the edge and see what kind of moves he can put on the young player. And Jedi Barron from the secondary, he had 11 TFL last year. These are guys that love to get up close to the line of scrimmage and make plays. How do you think this is going to factor into Texas? They're certainly going to look to throw a number of stunts and different schemes and looks at him to try and get into the backfield and try to plague Jalen Milroe and try to keep him inside the pocket here.
Jalen Ford is certainly a leader on this defense. He's kind of that vocal guy at linebacker, 5 total tackles against Rice and an interception for him. So he was kind of moving around a lot. He's a senior leader, very good player as well. Jeb Bush could be involved as well in the slot. He's a solid player who could certainly get some nice tackles for himself as well. I think they're going to attack Proctor early. He is his second career start going against a truly more physical defense in Texas and Middle Tennessee State. So certainly going to want to attack Proctor on that left side and try to hit Jalen Milroe from behind potentially. I think this is going to be a tough matchup for Proctor, but I think he'll find his groove throughout the game. But don't be worried. Don't be surprised he makes mistakes early on. Maybe a penalty or 2, or just looks uncomfortable out there.
in the secondary. They gave up a number of big plays last year, and they're also outside the top 100 in opponent completion rating. Efficiency over the last couple of years for the secondary has been a big problem. A lot of completions. That's not something you want to give up to Alabama. These short bubble screens, they got guys that can house them anywhere on the field. So they need to limit the completions. They certainly need to be disruptive on the defensive line. Ryan Watts came in last year, was a good corner for him. I alluded to Jedi Barron earlier. He's also a pretty solid coverage guy. Jalen Catalon coming over, played about 20 snaps against Rice, a former Arkansas transfer. He's used to playing SEC ball. This is a dude who can certainly make an impact there from his safety position. He has good ball recognition. He can also make plays downhill. Looking to Jalen Catalon to remind people who he is exactly in this Texas secondary this season. A transfer coming over, making a big impact here in this game.
Catalon's a very talented player at free safety. I love his ad. I think the secondary looked good against Rice. They didn't really allow too many big plays in front of them. Obviously, the level of competition is a little lower, but I think the secondary is solid. They got to find a way to avoid those big plays because that was a huge problem for them last year. Can they cut down on those big plays early on?
Looking at the Alabama defense, again, I'm critical of the defensive line. This is still a very good unit. They really bottled up Bijan Robinson last year. They never really seemed to get, scorched. I know about 2 years ago against Florida, they weren't very good, but after that, they really were able to key in on the run the rest of the season. They were one of the nation's best. And you were going to look at guys like Jaheim Otis, Justin Egbany, Tim Smith. This is a defensive line, certainly is a rotational unit. Maybe outside of Otis, there's no one that really stands out to you, but this is still a very talented and deep unit for Alabama. Deontay Lawson, though, really looking at him because his play recognition last year, it was just awful. He was lost at times, and, that's something you don't want to see here against this running game because they do have the backs that can really tear you apart. They do have the speed that can really win on the edge. His play recognition here, football IQ, it needs to be on point, or this entire unit's really going to suffer, especially if his defensive line struggles a little bit early on. I don't think they will. I think the struggles at guard are something that's certainly going to plague Texas in this game. But if I'm wrong, and I'm right about Deontay Lawson not being able to read the plays, then we could see the Longhorns just run down Alabama's defense here.
Certainly possible that could happen. Lawson, I think, looked better against Middle Tennessee. He had 7 total tackles, second on the team, 2.5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack for him. He needs to be more confident in the middle. He needs to focus, read the plays better. He's a very talented player. He has untapped potential there, certainly. Just got to find a way to get comfortable. Chris Braswell's a guy I need to see step up as well. We've been waiting on him to step up. Certainly a quiet night for him against Middle Tennessee. He did have a sack, though, and 4 total tackles, so quiet night, in my opinion. Jaheim Otis as well is a guy that's looking to step up. He's a sophomore in there, so he's still learning the game, going to be going to a tough offensive line for Texas. He had 3 total tackles against Middle Tennessee State. This defensive line looked better than I thought it would, but also I'm still concerned. I want to see if they can read the plays. It's going to be a tricky offense thrown out there by Stark. They're going to have some nice miscommunication, some confusion out there. Can this defensive line be able to keep up with that?
Yeah, and you talk about this interior, I think they're going to look to get, isolated matchups with Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell there on those guards and center Jake Majors, because I definitely think they're going to have more of, it's going to be a harder, approach to getting around the edge against those tackles, even though Jones certainly has had his struggles. I don't think that this is something Texas is too worried about, but this is certainly some matchups that I want to see them try to attack is on the interior. And, the rest of the linebacking core, Lawson, I think he played a lot of snaps against Middle Tennessee, certainly still trying to improve. You saw Tresman Marshall get on the field Blackshear as well. So we'll see who else steps up. I think this is going to be a big game for this linebacking core. You're going to find out who's going to be the leader this year. You look at the secondary. You talk about Jalen Catalon trying to remind people who he is. I think that's what Malachi Moore's mission is this season, and especially in this game from the nickel. This is a guy you're going to want to see at the line of scrimmage making plays. That's what Brian Branch was able to do, and that's why he was wildly successful. And Moore himself was good at doing that in his freshman season a couple years back. Remember, everyone was raving about him and how good he was. In this safety group I alluded to earlier, I'm kind of concerned against. Caleb Downs, obviously a true freshman, immensely talented player. He's going to be great. He's probably going to be a future first-round draft pick. Guys like Christian Story, though, Devontae Smith, who's going to step up around him. And you had the UAB transfer as well. And Jalen Key, he was able to come in and make some big plays for them as well. I remember last year, Kirby Smart told his team against Tennessee, he's like, look, we're going to play man coverage here. If you guys don't hold up your matchups, we're going to lose the game. It's as simple as that. And they did their job. They held up their matchups. Do you see Alabama maybe going with a similar approach here, leaving Terry and Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, the best part of their secondary and man coverage, and saying, look, hold up or don't. Win or lose the game in those sections right there.
I think it's a good idea. I like the idea of playing man coverage here. I think this is a good matchup with Terry Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. They both had decent nights. Arnold had some nice pass breakups. He had 5 total tackles. Caleb Downs looked fantastic in his first career start. 8 total tackles for him, led the team. Looked really confident out there. Jalen Key, a nice in-state ad from UAB. He looked good. He had a couple tackles, 4 total tackles, plus the interception from him. So I like what I saw out of him. Marshall coming over here. He's stepping in the transfer role. He had 4 total tackles. Dallas Turner, a huge question mark for him this year. Can he be that exciting player that we know he has the talent to do so? Didn't see a lot of him last night, but I think he's going to break out here and have a huge game against Texas. I think this defense is in a good spot. I think they look really good against Middle Tennessee State. Again, not saying much, but I think they have the right pieces here in the secondary unit with that 1-2 punch of Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry is a huge dominant 1-2 punch, and they could be really good if they isolate themselves and get the matchups they want.
Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons, I think Texas has the edge at quarterback with Quinn Ewers, and I think at wide receiver as well, even though Bama, they're pretty deep themselves. I think the top-end talent, Jatavian Sanders, a guy we haven't even mentioned yet, is really good at tight end as well, one of the nation's best. So I think receiver, certainly an edge as well for the Horns. I think running back's actually kind of even. I think I gave it to Alabama originally, but I think that's more of an even group now that I think about it. And I think the rest, offensive line, defensive line, you look at the linebacking position and in the secondary, I'm going to give it all to Alabama. Is that too far-fetched? Because I think Texas, they were certainly really good on defense last year. Jalen Ford's phenomenal linebacker, certainly better than anyone Alabama has at their interior linebacking position. But I think the outside backers for the Crimson Tide, they're kind of forgotten about. They're really going to make a statement this season. The defensive line, again, I'm critical of them, but they still produce and they're really good. And the losses for Texas this offseason were a little too much to try and give them the edge here. So looking at these rosters head to head, who do you think has the edge in these key areas?
I think this is a fair assessment. Quarterback, obviously, I think Ewers is going to get the nod over the Alabama quarterbacks. Now, Milroe, who's the starter, I think just Ewers is that true transcendent talent at Texas. The wide receiving room, I think it's underrated for Texas. I think people are talking about it enough. I think it's one of the nation's best. I feel like it's getting not enough love early on in the preseason and this week one here. I think this Texas wide receiving room is fantastic. I think the offensive line is great for Alabama. I think they're going to win that matchup. Defensive line as well. I think they get the nod. Linebacker and safety, defensive back unit, I think also gets the nod. Running back, you can certainly call it even and potentially give it to Texas, but I do like Alabama's balance just a little bit more. I think they do have a little bit better balance with McClellan and then Roydell Williams for third down, and then you have Justin Hayes, who's a bit of a wild carding play and when you need to. I think it's a very fair assessment of these teams.
Looking at the final thoughts on the prediction, keys to the game for Texas, you want to stuff that Alabama run like last year. You want to force Milroe to stay in the pocket, be strong on the interior offensive line. If they can do that, they're probably going to win the game. Alabama, though, don't get burned by a great wide receiver room. Avoid numerous 3-and-outs like last fall. I think we're not going to see that. I think Milroe's certainly going to be efficient with his legs. It's going to lead to this offense being able to stay on the field. And I think the safety group, Nick Saban, he's going to be aware that these guys are young and they have inexperience, not exactly proven there at the safety spot. They're not going to leave them on islands by any means, even though you think it's a good idea to go with a man coverage approach. And I think you'll certainly see that at times with some press man. But I don't think these guys are going to be left in too many opportunities to get absolutely burned because that pass rush at the same time I think is going to be cooking. So they're not going to be exposed all that often in this game. And again, I think the efficiency for the Alabama offense is going to be a key difference maker compared to last year where they were 20-something point favorites, went to Austin, should have lost the game, coming back home. They're aware of that. They're aware of some of the media attention that Texas is getting this season. I think 35-20 for Alabama. I think Quinn Ewers, they're going to have to play from behind. And I think that's not really going to allow them to do what they want to do late in the second half of this game. And I think the Alabama run game, it's not going to be great, but again, with Milroe, they're just going to have timely first downs to stay on the field. It's really going to grind them down in this game. 35-20 for me. It's always hard to do predictions for week 2 games, Nick, because you could be completely right or completely wrong. That's why we watch. That's why we love the sport. What is your assessment of how this game will go?
As an alumnus of Alabama, I'm not going to make a pick, but certainly this is going to be an exciting game. I won't be in Tuscaloosa for this game, sadly, but I've heard from my friends. I know that the feel around the campus is going to be wild all week, and in the city, it can be kind of the same sort of buzz they had when LSU came in 2019, the game of the century. Obviously not as quite high stakes as a non-conference game, but certainly is going to have that sort of buzz in Tuscaloosa. Game day coming to town. It's going to be a very exciting matchup to have on campus, a very exciting game to play at Bryant-Denny. I think it's a very even matchup. I think these two teams are both very talented. They both handled their job yesterday against their lower opponents from the FBS. They didn't play FCS teams, though. I do have to give them both credit. They did play FBS teams yesterday, so I do get some credit. Conference USA team at Middle Tennessee is pretty solid, and Rice is a decent team. They made a bowl game last year. I'm excited for this game. I think Alabama, they know what they have to do. They got to avoid getting burned, no big plays, avoid mistakes. A lot of penalties last year, obviously on the road is a little bit different. A lot of penalties cost them early on. Will Anderson had a bunch of bad penalties, a bunch of 3-and-outs for issues as well early in the game. Keep drives going, find consistency, try to find a balance between running the ball, use Milroe's strengths to your advantage, find a way to get him involved on the ground game, make sure he's comfortable in the pocket. I think Alabama wins this game. But this is going to be a very exciting matchup, and if Texas wins this game, they're certainly legit, and they could be involved in the CFP hunt if they do win this game, come to Tuscaloosa and knock off Alabama.
Yeah, nobody's discussing a world where Texas actually wins this game, so if they do, it's going to be complete madness. That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me to break down this perennial top 15 matchup between two elite programs.
Super excited for this. It's a huge game for college football. I'm very excited to see how it goes.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.